Effective immediately. HR downstairs.
Just 5 words, that's all Ava Reynolds said before sliding the termination notice across my desk and walking out like it was any other Monday. It looked like an ordinary piece of paper, but it was about to ignite the collapse of a $385 million merger in exactly 72 hours. I'm Mark Ellison, 51 years old, and I'd just been fired right before my $147,000 performance bonus was scheduled to be deposited into my account at noon on Thursday, exactly 3 days from now. 23 years of designing defense systems strong enough to guard nations erased in a single afternoon. Ava didn't even blink. She called it streamlining, as if loyalty were a rounding error on her spreadsheet. But the truth? She'd just tripped a wire she didn't know existed, one buried deep inside the system she thought she owned. That bonus wasn't just a number. It was a failsafe, written 12 years ago by a man who believed loyalty, competence, and foresight were stronger than greed. I folded the notice, calm and deliberate, feeling 23 years of quiet dedication crystallize into purpose. When you spend over 2 decades inside a defense contractor like Halcyon Dynamics, you learn that power isn't loud, it's buried in contracts, hidden in code, and written between the lines of policies nobody reads. I helped write those lines, every algorithm, every encryption layer, every classified schematic that left my desk passed through my signature. I wasn't just an engineer. I was the architect of the company's backbone, and yet, in the end, it took Ava Reynolds less than 30 seconds to erase me. She thought firing me before Thursday would save the company $147,000 and please the board. She never realized that by doing it, she'd set off the Clause 1 I drafted under the founder's supervision a decade earlier. It wasn't just a safeguard. It was a form of ownership protection, written for a future where loyalty would be treated as a liability. Outside, the sun reflected off the glass walls of the Halcyon complex. Employees hurried past, carrying laptops and coffee cups, unaware that their company was standing on a fault line. I slipped the termination notice into my briefcase and walked toward the elevator. I wasn't angry. Anger is for people who expect fairness. After 23 years inside Halcyon, I'd learned that corporations don't reward loyalty, they weaponize it. They praise your commitment right up until it becomes inconvenient, then call it restructuring. But I had made my peace with that long ago. Loyalty, to me, was never blind obedience. It was discipline, consistency, the quiet decision to keep things from falling apart when everyone else was too busy chasing promotions. When I got home, the smell of coffee hit me before I even opened the door. Emily, my wife of 26 years, looked up from the kitchen table, eyes narrowing before I said a word. She'd seen that look before once after a system crash that nearly took down a satellite defense grid. Another time when a subcontractor leaked code we'd spent years developing. What happened? She asked. I got fired, I said. Ava came into my office, dropped a paper on the desk, and said it was effective immediately. Emily set her mug down slowly. Why now? Because my bonus hits in 3 days, I said. $147,000 she thought she could save. She doesn't realize what she just triggered. Her expression shifted, not relief, not fear, just the quiet concern of someone who's watched me fight too many battles for people who never deserved the effort. Mark, she said softly, you've given them more than half your life. When is it enough? The question landed harder than the firing itself. I'd spent years convincing myself that what I did mattered, that designing systems that protected nations justified the late nights, the missed birthdays, the constant pressure. But loyalty comes with a price. And somewhere along the line, I'd stopped keeping track of the balance. I looked at her and forced a small smile. 3 more days, I said. After that, we're done with them. She nodded, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Maybe she was right to doubt me, because deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about proving that loyalty, when paired with foresight, could still win in a world that only believed in pragmatism. That night, long after Emily went to bed, I sat alone in my study. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the old desktop tower beneath my desk, the same one I'd used to build Halcyon's first encryption framework 20 years ago. The screen flickered to life, bathing the room in cold blue light. My reflection stared back at me. Older, tired, but sharper than ever. I opened a folder buried deep within an external drive labeled Archive H12. Inside it sat one file, Clause 14B, Aegis Docs. I hadn't opened it since the day Robert Halcyon, the founder and my former mentor, had asked me to draft it. Robert was old-school military, a man who believed that integrity was armor and precision was power. 12 years ago, we met at a small steakhouse near Alexandria after a long week of crisis management. Over bourbon, he told me something I'd never forgotten. The danger of building something valuable, he said, is that one day it'll end up in the hands of someone who didn't earn it. That night, we rewrote my contract from scratch. Hidden in the compensation clause, buried beneath dense legal phrasing, was the Aegis Provision. It stated that if my performance bonus were withheld, delayed, or terminated without cause, full ownership of the underlying defense algorithm and its proprietary architecture would revert to me, the principal designer. It wasn't symbolic. It was legally executed and filed in escrow under the supervision of a private security trustee. The system itself was tied to the bonus payment ID. Once triggered, the rights would transfer automatically. No signatories, no approvals, no loopholes. When I'd finished drafting it all those years ago, Robert looked me in the eye and said, "One day, this clause will protect more than just you. It'll protect the work from people like her." He was right. Ava thought she was saving the company money. In reality, she just pulled the pin on a contractual grenade, because once that Thursday deposit failed to process, every licensing right tied to the algorithm's parent patent, the one Halcyon's $385 million merger depended on, would vanish. I scrolled through the lines of code and documentation that proved it. Legal identifiers, ownership timestamps, encryption keys. Every byte of proof is sitting exactly where I'd left it, untouched. Leaning back in my chair, I exhaled slowly. The weight I'd carried for years began to feel lighter, not because the battle was over, but because the outcome was already written. They just hadn't read far enough. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:43 p.m. The hum of the computer filled the silence as I typed a single command into the terminal. The screen blinked once, then displayed a countdown timer in red digits. 70. 1 hours, 17 minutes, 08 seconds. That was how long Halcyon Dynamics had left before the clause executed automatically. To them, it would appear to be a technical glitch, a missed payment, or an administrative error. But in truth, it was the fuse. Once the system registered a failed transfer of my performance bonus, it would initiate the Aegis Provision, revoking all licensing rights tied to my work, locking access to the defense architecture, and sending verified notifications to the company's legal archive, regulatory bodies, and most importantly, Titan Defense Group, Halcyon's pending merger partner. They would wake up on Friday morning to find that the foundation of their $385 million deal no longer legally existed. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was letting the system do what it was designed to do: enforce accountability. The code didn't care who signed the papers or who sat in the executive suite. It only recognized the truth. I opened my email and began setting up a chain of scheduled messages. The first was a direct notice to 3 people: Daniel Klein, Margaret Shaw, and Elias Tran, all senior counsels at Titan Defense. The subject line was simple: Clause 14B, Contractual Impact Notice. The body of the message was even simpler. If payment ID 1147THR001 fails to process by Thursday, all associated ownership rights for the Aegis Defense Framework will revert to the original architect. As per contract section 14B, no threats, no emotion, just facts written in digital ink. The message was set to send automatically at noon on Thursday, the exact minute the clause activated. Then came the second wave, an automated lockout protocol. I logged into my private network, the one buried beneath layers of encryption that even the IT department didn't know existed. A separate interface appeared, a clean black screen with a single prompt flashing white: initialize failsafe. I hesitated for a moment, then typed yes. The code executed silently. Files began replicating to a secure offsite server, one only I could access through biometric verification and encrypted key pairing. Every blueprint, every line of proprietary code I'd written for the last 2 decades, every classified update, tied to government defense systems, all duplicated and sealed. When the timer hit 0, Halcyon servers would automatically purge their access permissions, leaving only placeholder shells. It wasn't sabotage. It was designed. Robert Halcyon used to say, "You don't protect a company by trusting it. You protect it by building the rules it can't break." He built the company on discipline and foresight principles Ava Reynolds had never understood. She inherited authority, not responsibility. By 2 a.m., I had finished configuring the failsafe. The room was dark, except for the pulsing red glow of the countdown. 71 hours left. I leaned back, stretching, and stared out the window at the city. The skyline was a constellation of ambition glass towers and steel frames lit like circuitry, each one humming with people who thought they were indispensable. I used to be one of them. Emily appeared at the doorway, her hair pulled into a loose bun, her robe tied carelessly. She looked half asleep, half concerned. "You're still up?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Just tying up loose ends." She glanced at the computer screen, saw the timer, and frowned. "That's the clause, isn't it?" I nodded. "The system's in motion." She walked over, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure about what's right," I said quietly. "I gave them half my life. This isn't revenge. It's correct." Her voice softened. "Just don't lose yourself in it, Mark. You've already won more than you think." When she left, I sat there in silence, listening to the faint ticking of the wall clock. She was right, in her way, but there's a kind of peace that only precision can give. The peace of knowing the equation balances. The wrong is self-correcting. By morning, I was back in motion. I arrived at Halcyon's headquarters at 7 a.m. The glass lobby gleamed with artificial perfection polished floors, digital displays flashing press releases about the historic merger with Titan Defense. Security watched me as I walked through, scanning my old ID badge. It flashed, "Access, denied" in red letters. I smiled faintly. Inside the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Same suit, same tie, same face, but the eyes were different. Sharper, focused, detached. When the doors opened, the hallway was quiet, except for the low hum of air conditioning and the muted click of heels echoing from the executive wing. Ava Reynolds passed by with 2 board members. Her voice measured and confident, rehearsed confidence masking unease. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. I wasn't there for her anymore. I stopped by my old office, opened the door, and looked around. The desk was empty. My nameplate already gone. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh printer ink, sterile and new, like my absence had been disinfected. But there on the shelf sat something she hadn't noticed. A small black flash drive with a silver tag. I left it there deliberately. It contained nothing. No files, no code, not even metadata, just a blank shell, a decoy for the predictable curiosity of power. Ava would eventually find it, plug it in, and feel the thrill of perceived control. She'd think she'd secured leverage. Meanwhile, the real data, the real backbone of the company would already be out of her reach. I closed the door quietly behind me and walked down the corridor. The hum of the building felt different that morning, tense, expectant, like the air before a storm. Back in my car, I opened my laptop and watched the countdown again. 62 hours, 49 minutes, 31 seconds. The progress bar beneath it showed a smooth stream of data transfers, secure, encrypted, untraceable. By the next day, subtle cracks began to form inside Halcyon. Rumors trickled through internal channels. Engineers noticed missing credentials, license key mismatches, and unexplained access denials. By noon, Ava's assistant sent out a company-wide memo about temporary system maintenance. They had no idea what was really happening, that the company's heartbeat was being redirected into a vault only I could open. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another, and another. The next morning, messages filled my inbox, some from colleagues, some from corporate numbers. Ava had started to panic. When a system starts to break, the first sign isn't failure, it's noise. Emails flood, calls multiply, meetings spiral. The machinery of leadership begins to malfunction, not function. I'd seen it before. This time, I'd designed it to happen. On the third night, the countdown reached 11 hours, 12 minutes, 4 seconds. The hum of my computer filled the dark room again. I could almost feel Robert's presence, that steady calm he carried, the way he saw failure not as defeat but as unfinished architecture. In the corner of my screen, a small window blinked. Message pending Titan Defense Legal Division. They'd received the automated pre-notice. I imagined their boardrooms and chaos lawyers arguing, executives pacing, trying to decode the implications of a single paragraph buried in a contract they'd barely skimmed. I leaned back, letting the thought settle. Not satisfaction, not even pride. Just inevitability. This was never about destroying Halcyon dynamics. It was about balance. About loyalty repaying itself in the only language the world respects any more consequence. By sunrise, the timer read 00:00:06:58. 6 hours left. Then everything I'd built would return to where it belonged. Not out of vengeance. The morning light crept through the blinds of my study, streaking the walls with the first pale reminder that this was the final day. I brewed coffee, but I barely tasted it. My eyes kept drifting back to the screen. 6 hours, then 5, then 4. Each minute felt like a quiet heartbeat counting down to judgment. At 8 a.m., the first call came from an unknown number at Halcyon Dynamics. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, another. Then, another. I muted the phone and kept working. The system was already in motion, and interference would only accelerate the collapse. Around 9, I checked the secure relay. The first phase of the Aegis clause had executed perfectly. Ownership certifications across multiple patent registries now list my name as the active rights holder. The mirrored repositories inside the company's cloud system were locked behind authentication protocols tied to my biometric data. For everyone else, those files might as well have turned to stone. The second phase began 30 minutes later. Titan Defense Group's legal department, alerted by the automatic notice, sent a request for clarification to Halcyon's board. I could imagine the reaction. Shock first, denial next. Then the slow, sickening realization that the merger, the one Ava had promised, was impenetrable, was built on sand. By 10, my inbox began to flood with messages forwarded from former colleagues, screenshots of internal memos, IT panic reports, legal escalation threads titled Urgent, Contractual Breach. Even a company-wide announcement from Ava herself. All systems are currently undergoing emergency verification due to unforeseen discrepancies in the Aegis licensing framework. Unforeseen discrepancies. That was her way of saying, we have no idea what's happening. Inside Halcyon's headquarters, chaos had begun to ferment. The control room screens flickered between red and gray, as system audits looped endlessly, each one failing to verify ownership credentials. The company's entire defense platform, 23 years of innovation, military-grade encryption, and millions in government contracts is now registered as unlicensed technology. The merger lawyers at Titan wasted no time. Within the hour, they sent a public filing request to suspend acquisition proceedings, pending verification of the Aegis rights. The stock began to fall. Slowly at first, then sharply. From my kitchen window, I watched the city awaken. Commuters moved through traffic with practiced detachment, unaware that a billion-dollar corporation was quietly unraveling above their heads. It was strange the world looked the same, but in the glass towers downtown, the tectonic plates of power were shifting. By noon, the phone finally stopped ringing. The timer on my screen hit 00:00:00:00. A soft chime echoed from the speakers, followed by a single notification: transfer complete. In that instant, the Aegis Provision was no longer theoretical. The intellectual property, the licensing, the architecture, all of it legally and irrevocably mine. The database confirmed it. Ownership ID ME2041AXR, verified under my personal credentials. I expected triumph. What I felt instead was stillness, a quiet kind of justice, like the world had corrected itself. Moments later, news alerts began to explode across financial feeds. Titangent Halcyon merger, under threat after legal dispute over IP ownership. Sources confirm executive oversight in Aegis licensing rights. Halcyon stock down 18% in early trading. I scrolled through the headlines slowly. Ava's name appeared again and again, framed in the same polite corporate language used for disasters, leadership, misstep, oversight, failure to verify compliance. The exact words she'd once used to describe other people's mistakes. It wasn't anger I felt. It was balanced. By mid-afternoon, I received an encrypted message from an old friend inside the company, Liam Chen, one of the senior engineers I'd mentored years ago. Mark, Ava's in the boardroom with the directors. She's pale, shaking. Legal says you were correct about the clause. They can't find a single loophole. Titan's counsel has already called for a suspension. Everyone's looking for you. I typed a single response. There's nothing left to find. That evening, Halcyon's share value had dropped by nearly 28%. Financial networks ran looping footage of analysts, debating how such an event could have occurred. Some blamed corporate arrogance. Others called it a strategic blind spot. But the truth was more straightforward. Greed always underestimates foresight. In the boardroom, I imagined Ava trying to explain away the catastrophe, her perfect composure cracking, her voice trembling under the pressure of a dozen accusing stares. I'd seen that kind of panic before, not loud, not frantic, but silent and desperate. The kind that knows the damage is irreversible. A final message arrived just before sunset. A short text, unsigned, but unmistakably hers. You planned this, didn't you? I stared at the words for a long moment, then typed back, No, Ava. You did. You just didn't read far enough. Outside, the sky was turning gold. I stepped onto the porch, the hum of the city faint in the distance. Somewhere downtown, the Halcyon building stood like a monument to everything wrong with modern power, shiny on the outside, hollow at the core. They thought firing me would save them a fraction of the budget. Instead, it cost them everything. By evening, the news cycle had consumed the story. Financial networks were running back-to-back coverage of Halcyon's collapse. The ticker on every channel scrolled the exact phrase in red: merger terminated. Analysts speculated about insider sabotage, leadership negligence, or regulatory breach. But the truth was more straightforward. They'd broken a promise written in ink, and the system had honored the man who hadn't. I sat in silence as the screen flickered between pundits, investors, and reporters, each trying to explain a story they didn't understand. They called it a catastrophic oversight. They called me the architect behind the implosion. But I knew better. It wasn't an implosion. It was a correction. Late that night, I received a secure email from Titan Defense Group's general counsel, Margaret Voss. Her tone was careful, the kind reserved for someone you can't afford to offend. Mr. Ellison, Titan acknowledges your legal ownership of the Aegis framework. Despite recent events, our board remains deeply interested in your technology. We would like to discuss a potential direct acquisition or partnership on your terms. Please advise availability within 48 hours. I read it twice. The same conglomerate that had once viewed me as a footnote in a billion-dollar transaction was now reaching out cautiously, respectfully, as if approaching a man holding the codes to their survival. Emily found me standing by the window, staring at the skyline. Is it over? She asked quietly. Not yet, I said. But the tables have turned. She handed me a cup of coffee and sat beside me. They'll come begging now. You know that. I don't want their apology, I said. Just acknowledgement that loyalty and foresight still mean something in a world that only pretends to value them. She smiled faintly. That's what makes you different, Mark. You don't fight for power. You fight for balance. 2 days later, I walked into the Titan headquarters not as an employee, not as a negotiator, but as the rightful owner of the Aegis defense system. The air was different there. Sharp, deliberate, humming with quiet respect. The boardroom was filled with executives, lawyers, and engineers, people who'd once studied my blueprints like scripture but never cared who wrote them. Margaret rose from her seat, extending her hand. Mr. Ellison, thank you for coming. I understand this must have been a difficult few weeks. I met her handshake firmly. Only for those who weren't paying attention. There was a brief silence before she gestured for me to sit. We've reviewed your documentation. It's airtight, every timestamp, every verification chain, every escrow log. You left no gaps. That was the point, I said. She nodded slowly. Our board would like to make an offer a direct acquisition of Aegis under your leadership. Full control. You set the terms. For a moment I didn't speak. I thought of Robert Halcyon, of the late nights drafting that clause over bourbon and conviction. I thought of the decades of loyalty that ended with a termination notice on a Monday morning. Finally, I said, I'll consider it. But understand this, if Aegis is to live again, it won't serve greed. It'll serve integrity. No shortcuts. No arrogance. No more pretending loyalty is weakness. Margaret smiled, almost with relief. That's exactly why we want you at the helm. The contract took 2 days to finalize a short, elegant, and deliberate process. It restored ownership of the Aegis Defense Framework under Aegis Systems LLC, my newly formed independent firm. Titan Defense agreed to a joint partnership, 51% under my control. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about legacy, about ensuring that what I'd built could no longer be twisted by ambition or ignorance. When the ink dried, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: stillness. Not the silence of defeat, but the calm that comes when the noise finally stops. Ava Reynolds had resigned quietly 2 days before the announcement. Halcyon Dynamics, stripped of its cornerstone technology, was being acquired in fragments, a company dissected by its own hubris. No press release, no apology, just a footnote in the long record of corporate arrogance meeting consequence. The press tried to reach me, of course. They called, emailed, and even showed up outside my house. To them, I was the man who brought Halcyon to its knees. But that was never the truth. I didn't destroy anything. I just allowed the system to enforce what it was built to protect the integrity of its creator. On the day of the official transfer, I stood in Titan's glass conference room, overlooking the city. The skyline stretched before me, familiar yet distant, like a reflection of everything I'd endured. Margaret entered with the final file in hand. It's done, she said. Aegis belongs to you again. I signed the final page, placed the pen down, and exhaled. The hum of the city below seemed softer somehow. Emily joined me that evening at home. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the same gold light touching the edges of the world that had once felt so cold. She reached for my hand. So, what happens now? I smiled faintly. Now, we rebuild. But this time, we build for the right reasons. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like open air. The next morning, I returned to the office not as an employee or a casualty of bureaucracy, but as an architect reclaiming his blueprint. The plaque on the door read, Aegis Systems, Integrity by Design. The phrase wasn't marketing, it was a promise. Standing there watching my small team unpack boxes and set up workstations, I realized something. Loyalty, foresight, and competence had always been enough. The world just needed to be reminded of its power. As sunlight poured through the glass walls, I whispered to myself, this isn't a comeback. It's a restoration. And for the first time in 23 years, I felt at peace, not because I'd won, but because what was once stolen by greed had finally been returned to its purpose. That morning marked something deeper than ownership. It marked equilibrium, the moment when years of quiet labor, the kind that goes unseen and unrewarded, finally outweighed the arrogance that dismissed it. There was no applause, no cameras, no headlines that captured what it really meant. Peace doesn't come with noise. It arrives in stillness, like dawn slipping through a glass window. In the weeks that followed, the world moved on, as it always does. Halcyon became another corporate cautionary tale. Analysts wrote think pieces about operational vulnerabilities, and CEOs swapped buzzwords in boardrooms trying to sound wiser than they were. But none of them understood the real lesson, that the system didn't collapse because of a missing payment or a hidden clause. It collapsed because it forgot what built it in the first place. People who cared enough to make things the right way. Even when nobody was watching, Aegis Systems grew quietly. No press launches, no exaggerated promises, just careful, deliberate work. I handpicked my team engineers who valued precision over politics, analysts who saw ethics as a form of intelligence. Every hire began with one question. Why do you build? Some said innovation. Others said stability. The ones who answered, to protect what matters, stayed. Emily visited often. She'd bring coffee and stay for an hour or two, to watch the team in motion. She said it reminded her of the early years before titles, before boardrooms, when the only measure of success was whether something worked as intended. One evening, she found me standing by the window again, looking out at the skyline. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The power, the recognition?" I smiled faintly. "No. I miss the people who thought it meant something." The truth was, power never interested me. Control did not over others, but over outcomes, over principles, over the integrity of what I built. I didn't want to own the world. I just wanted to leave behind something that couldn't be corrupted. A few months later, I received an unexpected package. No return label, just a plain envelope sealed in gray wax. Inside was a handwritten note, the kind people don't send anymore. It was from Margaret Voss. "Mark, Ava Reynolds has been barred from holding an executive position in any publicly traded firm for 10 years. Titan's internal investigation credited your documentation as key evidence of corporate negligence. I thought you'd appreciate closure. Also, Titan's board voted unanimously to renew the Aegis partnership for another 5 years without amendment. Integrity still has a market after all. I folded the note and slipped it into a drawer. Closure, yes, but it wasn't about Ava anymore. People like her will always exist. Ambitious, short-sighted, convinced that titles and power can replace competence and conscience. They burn fast, rise high, and always fall in silence. The system takes its time to catch up. That night, I drove back to the coast, the same stretch of shoreline where Robert Halcyon once took me after a grueling week of testing. He told me then, "You build the world's armor, but never forget who wears it." I hadn't understood it back then. I do now. Integrity isn't about defense. It's about clarity, about seeing beyond the immediate gain, the promotion, the bonus, and understanding that every decision becomes part of something larger. Every cut corner, every overlooked principle, every act of quiet decency, they all echo. As the waves rolled in, I thought about loyalty, not the blind kind that tolerates abuse, but the disciplined kind that keeps you anchored when the world forgets its values. Loyalty is not weakness. It's structure. It's what holds everything else in place when greed tries to dismantle it. When I returned home, the office lights at Aegis Systems were still on. My team was there, finishing a new encryption model faster, cleaner, more efficient than anything Halcyon had ever approved. They weren't doing it for praise. They were doing it because they cared, because they understood what the work represented. I stood at the doorway, watching them. They didn't notice me. They didn't have to. In that quiet moment, I realized something that all the contracts, clauses, and victories could never teach. You don't restore balance by winning louder. You restore it by building quieter. Months later, I was invited to speak at a defense symposium. I declined. Instead, I sent a short note to the organizer that read, "True innovation doesn't need an audience. It just needs integrity." A few days later, I found myself at my desk again, reviewing designs under the glow of a desk lamp. The city hummed beyond the window. The same rhythm it always had. Endless ambition disguised as progress. But this time, I felt no pull toward it. The Aegis logo glowed softly on the wall, a simple shield surrounded by the words "Integrity by Design." That motto wasn't just for clients or contracts. It was for me. A reminder of how close I came to forgetting what mattered. As I shut down the lights, I caught my reflection in the window, older, quieter, content. The kind of man who'd seen the machine from the inside and learned how to step away from its noise without losing his purpose. Before leaving, I whispered the exact words Robert once told me, now fully understanding their weight. You can't protect the world from greed, but you can protect the work from it. Outside, the night was still. The city pulsed with light, yet it felt smaller, almost fragile. And for the first time, I didn't see a battlefield of power or a monument to ego. I saw a reminder that every collapse carries within it the blueprint for renewal. And as I locked the door behind me, I finally understood. The most significant victories are not loud, not public, not celebrated. They happen quietly when what's right is restored to where it belongs. And in that quiet, loyalty, competence, and foresight stand eternal the last defenses against greed and the most accurate measure of a life well built. When I look back now, what stands out isn't the clause, the collapse, or even the victory. It's the quiet moments in between, the hours spent building something the right way, while others took shortcuts, the years of believing that loyalty still mattered in a world obsessed with quick wins. I used to think that strength meant control, owning every outcome, winning every battle. However, I've learned that real strength lies in patience. It's the discipline to do what's right, even when no one is watching, and the foresight to protect your work from the people who never will. What happened at Halcyon wasn't revenge. It was a balance finding its way back. Greed always believes it's invincible until it runs into someone who built for the long term. My story isn't about a man who outsmarted a corporation. It's about a lesson every one of us faces. Integrity isn't a luxury. It's infrastructure. Without it, everything eventually collapses. So if you take anything from this, let it be this: loyalty isn't blind devotion. It's the quiet promise to stand by what's right, even when it costs you. Competence isn't just skill, it's moral precision. And foresight? That's how you make sure the world can't undo what you've built with honesty. Because in the end, it's not power that lasts, it's purpose, the kind you protect. Quietly, for decades, until the world finally remembers what it forgot.